Holla ballers, it's Preacher. Now we're moving on to the Shaman as we roll on through all these class previews for Legion. And they've done significant changes to some of it and not much to others. Although it might seem significant at first. I've got to say, this is the first class preview I've done because I kind of passed out after how many videos I put out recently. Is that I got to check some community feedback and other opinions before I made this video. And that was a bad idea. Because super salty or super happy is how it's come out. And unfortunately, I'm sure some of it, somewhere along the line, is going to influence what I'm about to say. But in general, it's still my own opinion, and I absolutely will not be checking what other players are saying about things on going forward. Okay, so I'm just making you aware of that situation. Before we go too deep into this, as always, the caveat, this is the absolute basic foundation of these specs. If everything seems too simple, don't worry about it, because there's talents and artifacts all coming in which will alter the gameplay. I have given what my idea of what the basic gameplay will be like that you will be adding on to. That's the idea of the talent system, is you will bolt on additions and extras and all this kind of stuff to make it more interesting. And hopefully it will suit your playstyle. So please don't be too upset about what you see. Okay, let us begin then, as we always do, with Elemental. Certain Shaman have dedicated themselves above all else to forging a deep bond with the elements. They have peered beyond the elemental plane, gleaning visions of an ancient past where manifestations of volatile energies once raged unimpeded across primordial Azeroth. Though careful study and dedication, the Elemental Shaman is able to channel such power into destructive, magical surges. Through the body of the Shaman flows bolts of lightning, as if from storm, and bursts of fire, as if from molten earth. They manipulate the land itself and summon spirits of earth, fire, and storm to their aid. To battle an Elemental Shaman is to taunt the very forces of nature. Yes, indeed, and that does sum it up quite well. So the core fundamental changes going forward is that Maelstrom is a new resource, so mana is gone for Enhancement and for Ellie. They have been replaced with Maelstrom, this resource bar that you will fill up and then decide how to spend your Maelstrom going forward on big spells. That's the general idea. Also, totems have been reworked. You can now drop any totem whenever the fuck you feel like, as long as it's off cooldown. You could drop multiple fire, multiple water, doesn't matter. You're no longer locked to one totem each school. So a brief comment on that is I dislike that change. I really dislike that change. Why? Totem management is a core foundation of the Shaman. In my opinion, it's a core foundation to not be overwriting important totems, like you ham-fistedly fat finger dropping a mana tide totem or a healing tide totem and then, oh god, but healing stream's off cooldown, press the button, oh shit, I just lost my healing tide. This is not difficult gameplay, but it is something that you're supposed to be managing as a good player. You're supposed to be making best use of that, and just getting rid of it and making it so you can't make a mistake, essentially, besides pressing it at absolutely the wrong time, is a little bit weak sauce in my opinion. Don't like it. But one thing I do like, and I don't see why it never existed in the first place, is if the totems that should require some form of positioning, you will automatically do that now. When you click the totem, instead of it just falling at your feet and then using like totemic projection to send it wherever you want to go. One of the core things I did in my Shaman guides was making sure you're taking advantage of that. Now instead, when you click the totem, you'll get a targeting reticle and be able to place it immediately. So you'll always be doing that going forward with your Shaman, okay? So that's going to affect pretty much every single spec. So now we're on the same playing field. Let us go into it. So, we have this new resource, Maelstrom, and it's generated by Lava Burst, Lightning Bolt, and Chain Lightning, okay? Those three spells are going to generate your Maelstrom going forward. Now, what are you going to do with it? So, the first, quality of life, and mainly with the Elemental Shaman, it is a quality of life change. Gameplay remains pretty much unchanged, as most of the stuff with Maelstrom is basically fulmination. Alright? And as always, these previews are taken with the grain of salt that you guys have a basic working understanding of these specs. So, by doing this, they've made it so shocks have no cooldown. So some of you should be going, aha. Okay, so shocks no longer have a cooldown, which was super annoying, especially when you were trying to match up various talents to make them work and it didn't line up perfectly. So, how about Flame Shock then? They are still sticking with the idea that your Lava Bursts will do 50% more damage. Lava Burst no longer a guaranteed crit, by the way. This is a good thing, I'll explain shortly. But needs from Flame Shock. So if you have Flame Shock on the target, your Lava Burst will deal 50% more damage, okay? So firstly, let me address Lava Burst and the fact that it no longer crits. Depending on when you started the game, you will either know or not know. is that Lava Burst being a guaranteed crit was a nightmare in PvP at various levels, especially Wrath of the Lich King. So what they did is, because it was always crit, is they just nerfed the fuck out of its damage. Right? That's what they did. Whether you know it or not, that's what they did, is they gimped the shit out of that spell. Because it was, people were setting up for huge, huge crits. Which is why Ascendance looks awesome, but didn't always pull off tremendous damage. Because although you were chaining big crits, those crits, in terms of their actual physical number, were way reduced to compared to what the original idea of the spell was. So this means that crit is worth something again. Yay! And we no longer have to worry about certain things, as we know of in the past, certain spells that gave us things like crit, and we were like, oh great, that's absolutely pretty much useless for me. Boo-hoo, boo-hoo. So this is what's going to happen. That's how Lava Burst works. When you flame shock something, depending on your Maelstrom, between 0 and 20 will depend on its duration. So you'll get 0, if you do it with like absolutely 0 Maelstrom, you'll get 10 seconds worth of flame shock on the target. If you do it with 20 or 20 plus, it will only cost 20 at its maximum, you will get 30 seconds. Now, this is a reasonably good solution to the problem, and it's basically, for me, it's a problem with WoW's mechanics and their inability to want to stop pre-dotting. Firstly, let me address something. The target switching of the Elemental Shaman over the course of WoD has been a pain in the ass, because you were spending a global cooldown on a spell that generally wasn't coming off cooldown at the right time, because it had a cooldown, right? Or you were having to save it, which meant a loss of DPS elsewhere. And it was on for a full duration, with which that ad probably wouldn't survive. Those were the big problems. What is not a big problem, and people are still pissed about this is one of those things that I got from the community, and I have very little sympathy for now, is that people are still pissed that they have to dot a target to get the buff from Lava Burst. That is no fucking different at all from any other class, pretty much. When they target switches, they have to do something. When rogues have to switch, they have to rupture the target, because they get loads of benefits. Moonkids do the same thing. Dot targets do the same thing. Destro locks immolate and all this kind of stuff. Most classes have to do something when they switch target, rather than just being able to turn their heads and start blowing their dick into it, right? So I have really little sympathy for anybody who's still moaning about the idea that you have to flame shot before you Lava Burst. That's a standard game mechanic across the board. I understand that the mentality is that, well, without it, our Lava Burst sucks. It doesn't matter why you're doing it, right? It doesn't particularly matter, because it's still a big damage buff, and that's why everybody else does the same thing. So try and look at it from that perspective, rather than flame shock sucks and we need it to buff Lava Burst. Just look at it as target switching involves setting up for our burst, right? That's for pretty much everybody. Not everybody, but everybody. Pretty much everybody, right? So if Ret Paladin switches, he needs to build up Sentry and stuff like that. That's just normal stuff that has to happen. So I have very little sympathy. What I absolutely wish here is that WoW could introduce a mechanic where if you held down the button, it could charge the spell. And this would make this the perfect system. Let me explain why. If you tapped the button, it would use 0 Maelstrom and give you a 10-second Flame Shock. That would be superb, because for target switching, that's what you want. If you held the button down for a couple of seconds, a little bar would fill up, and then it would use the 20 Maelstrom and give you 30 seconds. Right? Why is this a good thing? With the system as it currently looks in Legion, which is that Earth Shock, similar to Fulmination, will be based on Maelstrom. When we target switch, the smart people, if this ad is not going to last like 10 seconds or anything like that, we should dump our Maelstrom every single time we're about to target switch. Otherwise, we will just be putting on 30-second Flame Shocks and wasting potential Earth Shock damage from the Fulmination buff. That's what sucks. And I totally agree with that, that sucks. Because if you have 25 Maelstrom and you're building up for your next big Earth Shock, which is going to be when you have like 100 Maelstrom, you're going to dump a lot of it into 20 seconds duration of Flame Shock that isn't going to get used. That sucks. So in order to counter that, the likelihood is we'll be doing something like, oh, ad spawned, I better cast Earth Shock at like 30 fucking Maelstrom to get rid of it so that my Flame Shock actually makes some sense and I'm not losing DPS. Because otherwise I'm channeling 20 Maelstrom, which is a fifth potentially of our, I believe it's 100 Maelstrom, a fifth of our Maelstrom bar into something that's not benefiting me at all. Does that make sense? I hope so. That's my only issue with the Elemental Shaman change so far, is I wish you could choose, absolutely choose, whether you want to cast a 0 Maelstrom Flame Shock despite having over 0. Right? Despite having 20, 30, 40, 50, I would be more than happy to do that, because that would make way more sense gameplay-wise. And a little build-up or something like that. Or even a precursor spell, which was like Nullify Maelstrom. Or Serenity. Something like that that doesn't consume your Maelstrom for your next shock. That would be cool. I'm more than happy with that, and probably fix this the only glaring problem I see with this quality of life change. We get our old mastery back, though. The one that I particularly like, which is basically multi-strike. So when you attack, you have a 40% chance to duplicate it. Will our little spikes still exist? I loved the little fucking Molten Earth spikes. I thought they were so cool. I hope they exist in some form. Even if it's like a talented spell where we summon rocks out of the ground and fucking machine gun them into something. It's such a wonderful graphic. I'd be sad to see that go. The talent they showed was Maelstrom Totem. It sounds exactly like Searing Totem. It's a totem that you place and it does nature damage to a target which generates Maelstrom. So it's a 30-second cooldown as like a buffer to generating Maelstrom. And that's generally how it's going to go. I've not even done a gameplay slide here because I don't think it's necessary. If you've ever played an Elemental Shaman before, you can easily see how this thing's going to play. It's basically no different. It's a slight quality of life change by removing the cooldown on shocks and making Flame Shock a little less tedious as a result. But it still has an issue there that I'll leave it to the comment section to discuss. So with that being said, let us move on then to Enhancement, which has had some dramatic changes. Intense Excuse me, let me start again. Intense communion with fire, earth, air, and water isn't exclusive to the Elemental Shaman. In many ways, Enhancement Shamans similarly bond with nature and leverage its power on the battlefield. What distinguishes them in their training and in their connection with the elements is their combat methodology. These shaman favour empowering their physical attacks with elemental energies and facing their adversaries up close. They don't shy away from the front lines, wielding magically augmented weapons, potent elemental attacks, and totems that shape the tide of battle. Oh yes, now as I said, this thing has had pretty dramatic changes. You're either going to like it or love it. I see it as a potential disaster. If I'm being completely honest, I see this as a very, very potential disaster. So let me explain it, because I'm about to put the screen up. Badoosh! There it is. Those are all the new things that are going on with Enhancement. There's a lot, more than we've looked at so far in any of the previews. So let's work through these. Again, your resource system is Maelstrom. Okay? So you have Rock Biter, which has no cooldown. This is basically your filler spell. It does some damage and it generates 15 Maelstrom. You can see I've started to abbreviate it because these descriptions got quite long. You also have Flame Tongue, a 12-second cooldown, which doesn't apply Flame Shock. It actually gives you a 16-second weapon buff, which means all your weapon attacks will do some fire damage on top of their normal damage, okay? Wind Fury is a passive and a 7% chance to trigger 3 extra attacks. Lava Lash is one of your attacks that has no cooldown, costs 30 Maelstrom and does decent damage. This is essentially a Maelstrom dump. Storm Strike is going to be the big bada boom. Big bada boom. 16-second cooldown, 60 Maelstrom, and smashes things in the face. You now have Maelstrom Weapon, another passive. Every single weapon damage you do, every attack with your weapons that causes damage will generate 5 Maelstrom. You also have Storm Fury, a passive. 2% chance to reset Storm Strike, make your next Storm Strike cost 50%, and make that Storm Strike cost no cooldown, or incur no cooldown. Okay? Storm Fury, very important. And then we have a Mastery on top of that, Enhanced Elements. It increases the chance for Wind Fury and Storm Fury to proc. Okay, that's a lot of stuff to take into account. What's the problem that I see with this? It's gonna start super slow. Like, making monks look Speedy Jet Li Bruce Lee from what? At the beginning of the expansion. Like, way, way slow. Until you start stacking up that mastery, this is going to be way slow. Because a lot of your Maelstrom is going to come from Wind Fury, which is only 7%, right? I mean, it's dual wield, so it's not the end of the world, particularly. So we're going to get a lot of the Maelstrom from that, and spamming Rock Biter. So a lot of our early game is going to depend on spamming Rock Biter, hoping for Maelstrom procs, and then pressing Storm Strike, with very, very few Lava Lashes. Likely, I'm guessing here, right? I'm guessing here, but this is the likelihood. Then, at endgame, it's going to get too fast. To the point where we're likely to incur, don't go over this amount of mastery. Because at this point in mastery, you're going to be generating a lot more Storm Fury procs. These Storm Fury procs and Wind Fury procs are going to be doing most of the work in generating your Maelstrom rather than Rock Biter. And at that point, it's going to start getting really, really quick. Because it's a percentage chance to proc, the likelihood is we'll fall back into the classic Mists of Pandaria enhancement problem of huge bursts of stuff to do and then not a lot happening, where we're like, okay, I'll have to Lava Lash here because nothing's happened. And I'm kind of waiting for the game to go, 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 go. And we'll start channeling in them Storm Strikes again, right? So this is going to be this weird evolution and scaling of the Shaman, which doesn't seem to have a good point, except like right in the middle. And obviously endgame when we can sort of say, well, past this mastery, it's not worth. You might as well get more crit, you might as well get more haste, you might as well work on these rather than mastery. And that seems to be the way this is going. The talent here is Sundering, 60 Maelstrom with a 20-second cooldown. I said it's Earthquake, but it's not. It kind of is. I mean, you sunder the earth in front of you and knock things in the air. So it's like an instant instead of like a channeled spell like Earthquake is. You know, it lasts over time. But it's basically the same sort of thing. So the gameplay style, although I've listed there like so many changes to the enhancement, right? The actual gameplay of the enhancement that I could tell right now, and I'd love your feedback on this as well, but please bear into mind that there are talents and stuff to come instead of just saying this is boring. Let's wait for the rest of it to come out, yeah? Is just to keep Storm Strike on cooldown in case Storm Fury procs, right? Keep the Flame Tongue buff up on your weapons. Okay, so that's like 16 seconds or something like that, or 12-second cooldown, so not a big deal. And then just fill with Rock Biter. Okay, to keep your Maelstrom nice and high, and fishing for Storm Fury procs and all that kind of stuff, and waiting for Wind Fury to go off. And then if you hit 90 Maelstrom, assuming that like there's 100 Maelstrom in your bar, then you'll Lava Lash to bring it back down and Rock Biter all the way back up while just waiting to Storm Strike again. That seems to be the general gameplay right now, without talents and stuff to amend this and tack onto it and all this kind of stuff. So bear that in mind, but that's generally the playstyle. Vastly different than what Enhancement Shamans know now, which is lots and lots of spells and a kind of methodical order of pressing them, and really tight in terms of trying to squeeze in every Earth Shock and all that kind of stuff. They've moved it, from what I could tell after reading through this, to this style of play. So I do worry that it's either going to be too fucking slow or too fast, and you'll just either be in a situation where you're just literally swimming in resources like Maelstrom and nothing to really spend it on other than Lava Lash, or you'll just be Wind Fury procking out your ass and Storm Fury and just be swimming in the alternative where you have all this stuff available and you can't use it, and then suddenly you've got too much and you can use it, but this is on cooldowns, and all sorts of combinations of things like that going on. So I would love to see what your thoughts are, whether you think it'll balance out nicely. So let's move on to Restoration. Some Shaman find a serene affinity for the restorative properties of water. These Shaman do not necessarily seek the light or turn to the divine, yet they feel a profound spiritual connection with the source from which all mortal life took root. So strong is their connection with water that the Shaman is able to restore life and heal afflictions. They balance this with a command of the other elements, finding harmony in nature and purifying their allies as a tidal surge washes across a sandy shore. Oh my God, I felt like that came out of a fortune cookie or something. Oh God, so spiritual. So spiritual, my friend. So spiritual. The resto, relatively unchanged. However, they're changing the direction of it. And they are once again waging war on fucking Chain Heal. Here's a clue, Blizz. If you don't like Chain Heal, change the way the fucking spell works. Because it doesn't matter how much you try and nerf it and gimp it and do all this kind of stuff. Ultimately, in an AoE scenario, it is our best choice. Even if you make it so that, oh, Healing Surge, or whatever the fuck, because, I mean, Chain Heal is mad expensive now, like 6% mana, and a 2.5 second cast. It's like way expensive, and the cast time is fucking forever. Is that, why don't you just make it so it only works in Healing Rain? Why don't you do something like that? Just change the way it works so it's more interesting and we can plan for it and do all this kind of stuff. Do something along those lines. Please, for the love of God. Stop trying to make this spell shit. Stop it. Just change the way it works and make it more interesting. You have that power. You don't need us to tell you that we're sick and tired. I mean, I don't even play a Resto Shaman, right? But as somebody who has to keep up to date with these things and then play them and give guides and stuff, I'm so sick and tired of having to fight the war with Blizzard about Chain Heal. I'm fucking tired of it. I'm done with it. Just make it different if you're not happy with it. Fuck's sake. Anyway, the push they're doing, as you see, I haven't listed the spells there, as they're basically exactly the same as they are in Warlords of Draenor, is they've changed the entire direction of the Resto Shaman via tidal waves. They've altered tidal waves. So there's not much for me to say in terms of gameplay other than let's go through what they've done with tidal waves. Now when you Chain Heal or Riptide, it reduces the cast time of Healing Wave by 40%, or increases the crit chance of Healing Surge by 40%. So you'll get this Tidal Waves buff, and it'll do one of two things, depending on the next key you press. And it stacks twice. Okay, so 2 chain heals, or I believe a chain heal and a riptide will give you 2 stacks. Okay, or 2 riptides, or 2 chain heals, whatever you want to do, will give you 2 stacks of tidal waves, and then you must choose what to do with them. You'll either cast a very, very, very fast healing wave, or you will get an almost guaranteed crit, likely with gear, of healing surge. That's the push they're making with Restoration Shaman. And I'm going to be honest, it's not enough. It's not that interesting. Because it just makes Restoration gameplay pretty much the same as it is now. But they now have to fill in with this spell, which in most cases is going to be Healing Wave. Because Healing Surge spam, the likelihood is you're not going to be like, oh, maybe I want to spend 5 seconds casting 2 chain heals. Or I want to just throw out 3% worth of mana on Riptides. Well, I can't, in fact, it's a 6-second cooldown. Probably with talents. A 6-second cooldown Riptide and a chain heal to get a very, very fast Healing Surge. I could just cast Healing Surge. It might not crit, but the guy will probably live instead of waiting like 4 seconds to 4 seconds, in fact, to solve this situation. It's interesting that they're pushing it that way. I'm sure it'll work out in the balance, and the talents and the artifacts will probably augment this in some way. But it seems like a very simple solution to a problem that wasn't a very big deal. And this was the first one I've seen that feels like change for the sake of change. But as somebody who doesn't main a Resto Shaman, I could be completely off the boat on that one. And I would generally look to the community at this point to see what your initial feedback is on that. But it's not overly, it's certainly not made me go, woo! That sounds cool. No, I haven't had that. The totem they've shown off is a 12-second cooldown talent called Wellspring, which is basically Chaos Wave of water that heals people. That's essentially what it is. Sounds pretty cool. I hope if you've ever done Mythic Bracken Spore, it's probably going to look something like that, I would imagine. I mean, I'm thinking it's just a nice graphical effect more than anything. All right. I will point out here as well, for those of you who've made it this far, even if you're looking at all your Shaman specs, is that Enhancement's AoE is also changing, but they've only tweeted it, which is why I haven't included it in the video. It's not written in lovely blue, which is going to be a frontal cone wind attack, similar to Wellspring in terms of how it plays out. So, as it's not been completely finalized, I don't have like specific stats on it, I'm not including it in the text or even in conversation, but it's something you should be aware of, that it was tweeted. Alright guys, so there's the Shaman overview. A mixed bag, to say the least. A very mixed bag. There seems like a lot of change without a lot of change, except in Enhancement's cases, which seems like a mega simplification of things. So let's see how this is going to play out. I look forward to the talent trees and the artifact stuff in order to actually see what the final product is here. So remember, this is just the foundation. Alright guys, let me see what you got to say. Bye-bye.